Well, good morning, all. It's good to see you. And this morning, what we're preaching on today it feels a little bit like part 2 for what Mark brought us last week. So it's a bit of a continuation, really. So it seems. I've got a PowerPoint, hopefully, lined up. And I wonder if anybody can guess. This is probably a representation of a well-known advert. I don't know if you can guess what it is. Maybe some of the children can. Yeah, shout out. Andrea. Oh, I should mention that. Yeah, the famous dog with the toilet roll. And that doesn't mean you can all rush out and buy more toilet roll, by the way. But what's the words that stick out at you there? Soft and strong. And hopefully this sermon's not that long. But yeah, entitled it Soft and Strong. And my theme is about strengthening the church, and Acts chapter 16 verse 5 says the church was strengthened in their faith and the numbers grew. But we're sort of looking at Acts chapter 15 verse 36 to chapter 16. I'm not going to read it all out because it'll take quite a while, but some of the themes that I wanted us to look at here were about, in this chapter we see about speaking the truth in love, teaching life principles, causing no offence, and encouraging each other. And these are the things we're going to look at. So we see that Paul and Barnabas have been on a mission, and they say to each other this grand idea in verse 36, where they say, let's go back and revisit the churches. Let's go back and teach them and strengthen them. And it tells us in the next verse that a sharp disagreement occurs between Paul and Barnabas about John Mark. And Luke describes this as a sharp disagreement. Now, I don't know about you, but I quite like to hear some more of the gossip, the details there. But Luke quite rightly sees fit to not tell Andrea all the juicy details, because that's not what we're going to be learning from this. There's something else we need to learn. And this sharp disagreement is so strong between them that they actually agree to part ways, don't they, at this point? But the disagreement is about John Mark, or we know him as Mark, who, actual fact, is a cousin of Barnabas, but Paul is adamant he doesn't want to take Mark along because apparently he's let them down on a previous journey. He left them and went home early. And there's something that he doesn't want to risk taking him along with him. So he says, I'm not going to risk the gospel. Paul's mission, he's very strong about this. The gospel, sharing the good news, is the most important thing for him. And he says, I'm not going to risk that. So I don't want to take him. And he's not budging on this, And also Barnabas also is very strong in this opinion that, no, I think we should take Mark. You need to give him a second chance. Now, when we look in the Bible later on, we see that Paul teaches the church, the mature Christians, about how to be with each other, about speaking the truth to one another, about being able to discuss matters that might have a different opinion. And he tells us in Ephesians chapter 4 that we be patient and gentle and humble with each other. And as mature Christians, we kindly share the truth with one another out of concern so that you grow as a church. And we know that speaking in truth, this is a saying that's sometimes taken out of context. We feel a bit self-righteous and do-goody, and I'm going to tell you this that you need to do. But no, Paul's saying be gentle, be kind when you're telling each other about process of correction. And I get the impression that this situation that we see, that Luke's recounting to us, is perhaps some of the experiences that Paul has learnt from, and he's telling us about this. And what we see here is that there's this difference of opinion, and that does happen. And we learn, don't we, that a good friend will challenge you. And we know there's that verse from Proverbs 27 about iron sharpens iron. And in this church, we do have prayer groups and accountability groups where we share with each other and pray for each other, encourage each other and help each other on the right path. I know that some of the men have groups where they help each other to account to each other, and it's as if it's like iron sharpening iron, two metals rubbed against each other to make a tool more effective. So we know that's quite important. But what I really want to say here on this is the strongness, the strength in Barnabas, who is, we don't know why, but is he prompted by God? We don't know why, but he really wants to give John Mark a second chance. And he's not budging on this either. He's very strong in that opinion. But we see here a soft heart. So we see strong values, but we see a soft heart in how he's going to care for the young man, Mark. He wants to give him a second chance. And I really feel there's a point here that I need to share with you, that God is about second chances. And we see these two men in this ministry. They've had a really good ministry, and they're looking for the next thing. But at this point, they're about to part ways because God has allowed this to happen, and they actually are going to disagree, and they're going to part company. So there's a point where they've got to let go of what's gone on before, and they look to God and see what's going to happen next. And I'd like to say to us here, there might be something that we need to let go of, and it might have been a really good thing. But it's time to move on to the next thing, and God's saying, come on. It might have been something that wasn't so good for you. It might have felt good at the time, but it's wrong and it's giving you pain and distress. It's time to let go of that and let God take your hand as you move into something different and new. And this thought of second chances is really important because God gives us a second chance. And God was keen to let Mark have a second chance. In fact, it's so important that Mark has a second chance that he goes on to become an amazing, outstanding man of God. And Paul later on commends him for this. And also, God allows Mark's written book to be in his holy Bible. So this second chance that God prompts Barnabas to give to Mark has a knock-on effect. Incidentally, the Gospel of Mark is one of the most straightforward books of the Bible to read. So if you've never read the Bible before, start with the Gospel of Mark, because that's a really good, simple way of learning more about Jesus, this man that we talk about. Second chances are important. And the other thing is that we see is we get one pair. There's two men here, Paul and Barnabas. They split up and become two pairs, which means they're going to cover more ground. They're going to speak to more churches. And Barnabas takes Mark and goes off towards Cyprus, and Paul goes with Silas towards Cyprus and Syria, and later on picks up a young man called Timothy. So what an amazing event this disagreement led to. And it's interesting, and I'm thankful that Luke included it for us to learn from, actually. So the next thing that they were supposed to be doing was they'd been commissioned to go back to these churches then and to strengthen them and to teach them the principles. Now, we heard from Mark last week how the leaders had been talking about some issues and clarifying things about things that weren't so important, traditional Jewish rites of passage didn't need to happen necessarily, but there were some things they wanted to say, that, abstain from immorality, be careful what foods you're eating, because we don't want to cause offence, and we don't want you to be ill. These things are important. But I'm sure that Paul was also sharing, good principles. He's sharing the good news again. He's talking about the gospel and about this Jesus who died for our sins. And he's also talking about principles for life, the way we should be living. And these are important things. And what's more important, they're going in person. And I was thinking about this, actually. Recently had the privilege of starting the leadership, ground level leadership engine course, and they were talking on there about how we learn, heart, head and hands. And it got me thinking back to when I was a young student nurse, how we learn. and we have the passion or the desire to learn in our hearts. We're interested, but then we need to have some background knowledge, some foundation knowledge in our head. But then we need to apply it, or we need to be doing with our hands, don't we, and learn. And at work, if I'm teaching my team or patients how to do something, I could give them a plain, boring leaflet, or I could demonstrate with a piece of kit and explain and show and demonstrate and talk more about it. So it happens more clearly if someone goes in person. And this is what these men are doing. They're going in person. They're saying, here's some really good advice, and we're going to hang around to affirm it and to see if you can get on with it. We're going to be good role models as well. And it's really important. So being strong in the process and the beliefs, but they're caring and nurturing and showing us that softer side of the ministry. And then we see this about causing no offence. We've mentioned sort of some of the traditions. But this is an interesting thing, because Paul meets up with a young man called Timothy. And it's really important, children and teenagers, to know that God will call you sometimes as a young person. And this young man, he's got a good reputation and is well known. Now, there's an interesting point here, because Paul has recently been talking about Jewish traditions and on the matter of circumcision. And here we find Timothy, whose mother is a Jewish lady, and his father is a Greek. And Paul wants to minister amongst the people that are there, the Jewish community. And he realises that if Timothy hasn't undergone this rite of passage, that he might not be accepted. So he sort of encourages Timothy to go ahead and get it sorted. And that could look like a change of opinion and a bit unstable. But here we see again how Paul is strong in the instruction and strong in the faith and sharing the gospel, because he's saying, the important thing for me is that the good news is shared, and if we offend, it's going to be difficult to have a trusting relationship. And I think that's important for us to recognise, isn't it? Cause no offence if you can. Let's share and learn and understand who our neighbours are, understand who our colleagues are. It's really important. And we see that Timothy is well received, and he develops a good reputation and becomes an excellent pastor with excellent guidelines of his own as he gets older and writes those down. We know in our own church that we support some certain people that are working. So we've got Rachel in Albania. She lives amongst her community. She's even taken citizenship, she tells us. And we've got Mary and David in Bosnia. They are living amongst the people and sharing and learning to understand about other traditions so that they can be effective. Strong in values, but soft in heart, in care, in learning, and in nurturing. It's how we develop relationships, and it's really important, isn't it? And then we come to the fact that this is all about encouraging one another. And when I read this chapter, I see that the apostolic leaders are absolutely committed to caring for the church, for nurturing and developing the church. They care deeply. And so this process of developing relationships and delivering these principles, we see how the church is strengthened and the numbers grow. And that's really, really important for us, isn't it? That we nurture one another, we encourage one another through the difficult times, through the highs and the lows, supporting, celebrating, praising, commiserating, getting behind somebody when they're having a difficult time. We know that Jesus taught us in the Gospel of John, chapter 21, verse 17, Jesus said, "Feed my sheep." And we've heard a bit about the shepherd this morning. Feed my sheep, look after each other, go out and find the one that is struggling. Get around them, nurture them. It's really important. strong in delivering care, being consistent, a protective shepherd or protective group as we look after each other, supporting one another, reaching out to someone who's vulnerable. And Andy's just reminded us of doing that, reaching out for the one that hasn't been included, reaching out for the vulnerable, the softness of your heart, the compassion. It's really important, isn't it? So I guess this chapter, I've lived with this chapter for the last few weeks, and I am just overwhelmed by how much Paul obviously cared for his young church. And I guess that I want to encourage us that God will strengthen us on our journey, and that we will be strong in our faith and strong in what we believe and our values and our principles, yet we will be soft, sharing with others, nurturing others. Sometimes we need to develop and show that vulnerability in ourselves as well, don't we? I'm going to get Josh to come up while we're finishing. But if there's something there for you that you need to pray about, let us know. We can pray with you about that. Soft and strong, showing your vulnerability but showing your strength, being confident in that. It's really important. And I think we just rely on God to show us what's next. It might be that we're going to go on a different journey. It might be that we're going to share a different thing and do things a different way. It might not be the way we've always done it. But God shows us a way. And if we're clear on that, we will be strong in that. But don't ever forget, whatever your principles are, don't ever forget that we need to show compassion and tenderness towards one another. And that's one of the simplest things I think we can learn, isn't it? So I'm going to let Josh lead us in the last song. Thank you. God bless you.